eclecticism again, but it's terribly, terribly garish and over the top. Now, what's clever about Kent is that he can be working for the king as part of the Office of Works because of Burlington's patronage, but he can also be working for the opposition because, of course, Prince Frederick, Prince of Wales, was very much in opposition to his own parents and had his own separate court. So Kent does this extraordinary state barge for the Prince of Wales, as you can see. Now, you can't call that Palladian, can you? You can't. I don't know quite what you can call it. There are mermen at the front. There are bare-breasted mer women. There is a sort of a Palladian little canopy in the middle, but it is a wonderful, wonderful confection, which survives, as you can see, at Greenwich. But at the same time, he's doing a very interesting garden at Carlton House with that temple, which is yet another bagno, a bathhouse. And the garden at Carlton House is particularly interesting because it's very, very formally laid out on a great big axis with the bagno at the end of it. He has these wings of trees, which is basically what he does, which are a mixture of deciduous and conifers, and you punctuate each section of them by urns or terms or herms. But then, interesting at Carlton House, there are lots and lots of island beds. Almost as if Humphrey Repton had come along and done all these awful island beds around about 1800. And trellis as well. So island beds, trellis, but then this long axis. Now this is interesting because it effectively means that in the 1730s, you're still hanging on to formality, but he is trying to soften it by bringing more flowers into the garden and also bringing height with trellises. So fascinating things going on. Again, he's trying to roughen up the mix of not only architecture, but also garden design. Are you all with me? You getting it? Yeah. This is an interesting excursion. He wants to go Gothic. And there's lots of reasons for this. One of the reasons is San Marco. One of the reasons is that, you know, he's interested in native Gothic, probably because of Bridlington, but also because he doesn't want to be a Palladian. His problem is that his main patron is an absolute lunatic for music and very little else. You know, Burlington wasn't really interested in architecture. He was just interested in music and art. Most of what he saw and did on the Grand Tour was to do with music and art. And so you got this man coming and thinking, right, well, I've got to impose Palladianism on the 18th century, and I've got this malleable man, William Kent. Kent doesn't really want to be a Palladian architect. Kent wants to do stuff like this. And this is the exciting stuff. This is Gothic with a K. So top left, Westminster Hall, Court of the King's Bench. Bottom right, Gloucester Cathedral screen. Top right, the York pulpit. And bottom left, a candlestick. Again, in sort of weird eclectic fusion. And you can see there's elements of classicism and elements of Gothic in all of them. It's this eclectic urge that Kent is more interested in than anything else. And what happens then when we look at this eclectic urge and we then transplant it to gardens? And who is the person that's driving this? Is it Kent or is it the patrons? Now, all those years ago, I did that book, Gentlemen and Players, Gardeners of the English Landscape. I thought that was quite a good title, actually, because gentlemen and players, you know, lords, the professionals and the amateurs. Publishers didn't understand what I was talking about. And I said, well, no, it's a good title. First book I did was Trumpet at a Distant Gate. And it went to the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they said, is it about music? And I said, no, it's about gate lodges. Oh, you can't have that title. So I did. It didn't sell, interestingly. And now I've had to change the title of Gentlemen and Players because you can't get it on Amazon. You can't Google it on eBay or Amazon, and it doesn't come up properly. So they said, could we call it Gentlemen Who Garden? And I said, no. And they said, could we call it Gardening Gentlemen? And I said, no. Why don't we call it Gentlemen and Players? Because nobody can find it. I couldn't give a monkeys, I said. So they've called it Gentlemen Gardeners. So when it first came to me as proof, they said, we'll call it Gentlemen and Gardeners, and we'll say, the men who recreated the English landscape garden. And I said, so was there a landscape garden before they then recreated it? Oh, didn't they do that? This is what any publishers in the room? So we had to come to a compromise. Gentlemen gardeners, the men who created the English landscape garden, then I looked at the blurb. Now, I split an infinitive quite a lot. I quite like it. Dylan Thomas split infinitives almost all the time to brilliant effect. But I try not to use cliches. I counted up the cliches in the blurb that they'd done for the book. There were 17. And the last one was, an Englishman's garden truly is his castle. How about that? So I got my agent to rewrite it. We had one cliche to satisfy them. Anyway, when I wrote that book, Gentlemen and Players, all those years ago, 10 years ago this year, it was published, I was trying to make a point about who really created the informal garden, the Arcadian garden, the templed Arcadia that we've got outside. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Caroline probably had a lot to do with it. Now, there was a very interesting conversation between lords and ladies of the period with Pope in about 1719, 1717. I'm not going to go into it now, but I talk about it in the Kent book. But come the 1730s, Queen Caroline, as she then was actually doing a brilliant garden at Richmond, which of course became Kew. Now, recent scholarship has suggested that Kent, who didn't get there until the 1730s, was not laying out the first garden, and I'll come to that in a minute. But what's significant is that when he did get there in the 1730s, he created two incredible garden buildings that everybody talked about. One of them they thought was good, and one they thought was a bit of a joke. Oh, and on the right is the embarkation of Cythera. It's a Watteau painting, and it's an engraving based on that Watteau paving, but showing in the background all of these garden buildings that Kent put around Richmond Park. Now, the important thing about this is it doesn't look like an Arcadian garden, does it? It doesn't look a bit like an Arcadian garden. There's loads of fields for a start. There's loads of fences. And that's, of course, because George II loved to shoot partridges. And, of course, in the early 18th century, all gun stock was very heavy, with very long barrels. So the only thing you could do was shoot things on the ground. So grass, grouse, and partridge. But, of course, once they perfected very small guns, very light guns, with lighter stock, they could do the art of shooting flying. And then you get pheasants. So it goes sequentially like that. So at this point, you can only shoot them on the ground, so you've got to have lots and lots of fields to have the coverts, so you can do that. But of course, what's happened here at Richmond is that you've got 5 mini wildernesses. Can you see them? I won't point them out, but you can see 5 little areas of bosky foliage with wiggly paths. And these are where, of course, Kent was to site a lot of his garden buildings, some of which you can see around this Roke engraving. The 2 important ones are the one on the left, which is the Hermitage, and the one on the right, which is Merlin's Cave. Both gone, of course, completely. Now, this is probably the most important quote in the whole of the talk. And this is the Earl of Egmont, 1734, talking about Caroline. I told her flatterers were fools, for generally princes see through it. True, said she, and therefore it must be done very gently and fine. Soon after which Sir John Rushout, telling her that we owe our best taste in gardening to her, she replied, yes, indeed. I think I may say that I have introduced that in helping nature, not losing it in art. So you have to help nature and not lose it in art. Now, you could say, well, this just means that, if you lose it in art, it's a formal garden. If you help nature, it's an informal garden. But then, of course, one needs to translate that into actual design. So what we really need is a garden that goes right the way across the whole of those fields, with the fences taken down, with wildernesses in them, with open glades, and, of course, temples. And that's how you get your Arcadia. So at Richmond, we haven't quite got there. Now, just a bit about recent scholarship. In the 1720s, all of those little widdly wildernesses were laid out by the Greening family. One of my PhD, I wanted to do a PhD, but she was an MA student. She did a big dissertation on the Greenings. And the Greenings were very interesting and important people, nurserymen garden designers, and they did those wildernesses before Kent got there. It's brilliant when you write a book and you get one of your students to refute it. It's the most brilliant thing that can ever happen to you. The only thing is you don't want them to do that in an interview, do you? And this was an American girl, Paige, and she came to me and she said, I want to come and see you for a weekend, and then I might come and do your MA. And I said, fine. So she came for a weekend, and I was so transfixed by her intellectually that I took her on. And she's the one that worked out how to create 3 rainbows in a grotto. Nobody else had managed to work out how it was done at Wilton in the 1650s. And she'd worked it out in half an hour. She's a scientist. Great. Paige Johnson. She's going to be brilliant in the future. If only we can get her back from not doing nano batteries, which is what she does in America at the moment. So these are the 2 garden buildings. Well, this is the first garden building. It's the Hermitage at Richmond. Kent uses the same design when he goes to Stowe. As you can see, it's a classical design, very rough, really straight out of sort of Italian design. But what's fascinating about it is that it is a paean, if you like, to both philosophy and science. And there were people in it like Locke and Burke, William Woolston, that were to do with natural philosophy as well as science. And inside, a brilliant, brilliant design that's got touches of Rococo as well as classicism. But there on the top right hand is the picture that I showed you the staffage of very early on in the talk. And that is Kent as a satire, bending his knee and kissing Queen Caroline's hand. Now, of course, everybody that then reads that and says, oh, you're making it up. But I'm not making it up. There is the design for the Hermitage. It's for Queen Caroline, and that is Kent kissing her hand. No doubt about it in my mind, if you know Kent. The other one was weird. It's like sort of Tahiti, isn't it? Tahiti with 3 domes. The most extraordinary confection. And it was Merlin's cave. And of course, what Caroline was doing very cleverly, because she was a very intelligent woman, she was trying to connect the Hanoverians with the Tudors, the Welsh Tudors, and then back through to Arthur and the time of Merlin. Kent was working on illustrations for Spenser's Faerie Queen at this time, which is all to do with that particular period. And there is Merlin as a waxwork, and you can also see Queen Elizabeth. There were also Elizabeth of York, Henry VII's wife. Caroline was also having pictures, paintings done by Kent of Henry V, so she was interested in the Welsh connection, the Tudor connection with the English royal family, so that she could tap into it. So this was a piece of propaganda in London, and everybody went to see it. Most people thought it was a bit of a joke, but it was quite fun. The guy who actually looked after it was a man called Stephen Duck, and he was often very drunk when people came, and he got all the iconography wrong. So, you know, Gentleman's Magazine ridiculed him and it. But it was wonderfully Gothic. And I just wanted to show you this one on the left, the bottom left. That's a pen and ink set in Gothic. Can you see it's got an owl on it? Wisdom. Isn't that beautiful? That's Kent. Are you getting him? Are you with me? You're very quiet. We're on YouTube soon. Come on. Okay. The two most destructive people in terms of Horace Walpole in the whole of the 18th century is the Duke of Newcastle, as in here, and Henry Pelham, as in over there, or wherever Esher is, over there. Remember, I'm a boy from the sticks, so I've never been here very much before. And this is Henry Pelham in his temple at Esher, showing the side elevation of this extraordinary house that Kent did for him in the 1730s. Of course, Henry Pelham is to become Prime Minister, so again, a very important political man, and of course working here as well for the Duke of Newcastle, also in the 1730s. Really, really key decade. That's what's left of Esher Place. Do any of you live in those houses around there? No? Some of you? There are very sort of executive houses around there, aren't they? Rather lovely. But of course, you're living on what would have been, some of you are smiling. You do live there, don't you? Goodness me, I haven't said anything naughty about it. I almost said something then, but I didn't. This is how you create an Arcadian garden from a formal garden. This is actually quite a fun bit. I don't know whether we're going to manage to get this on YouTube, yeah? Okay. Concentrate. Are you with me? Right. Let's look at the top one, because this is... No, where's Jeremy? What's the time?